Little clap.
Little clap.
The clap has been had. I cut everything from 6-second spots up to feature length and episodic documentary content. The approach to each of those different genres, the approach to each of those different cuts really should differ because the content is so different. I don't approach a 30-second storyboarded car commercial the same way that I would approach a 90-minute feature-length documentary. Those are two extreme examples. Basically, if you're cutting a milk commercial, you shouldn't approach it the same way that you do if you're cutting a 30-minute narrative, mentally and also realistically. I run into a lot of editors and I review a lot of cuts, and I think tone, pace, and rhythm are three things that you can constantly work on. There are three things that you can constantly hone in order to give your edits a personality and a perspective. It can be really difficult to practice editing because the nature of editing means you need something to edit, and you don't always have footage readily available to cut. Some people like to go back through old edits and do different cuts or do director's cuts or editor cuts, whatever. Some people like to repurpose old media, and I find that can be a little bit difficult, especially after I've spent so much time with a specific set of footage, to then completely throw out my preconceived notion of what it was meant to be and what it came out to be, and to reapproach the same media in a different way can be a little bit difficult, and I don't think it really helps you practice tone, pace, and rhythm. It doesn't help you really dive into the craft and the artistry of editing. Ever since I was a kid, I've been enamored with poetry. I've consumed and read a ton of poetry. I don't know what it was about poetry that just kind of like captivated me and pulled me in. It was the way that the poet abused language, the way that a poet abused grammar and punctuation and spacing and the page, that really pulled me in. And it kind of opened my eyes to the reality that there can be these preconceived notions, these rules that can be pulled apart and put back together in very interesting ways. And I was amazed by this. And so as I would read poems, the first thing that hit me was how it made me feel. Like I could feel a poem, right? I could feel a poem way before I could understand or begin to understand a poem. Like I could feel the texture, I could feel the rain, I could see the fog, I could feel the sun. There's all these elements of a poem that I could really start to connect with in like a very visceral way. Like I wanted my edits to feel like that. Like I wanted them to have a tone, a pace, a rhythm, and I wanted them to be able to be felt on an emotional level as well as a logical level. Poetry kind of started to become a blueprint for me to look at how edits come together and the rules that you can employ and the rules that you can break. And so now let's bring these two concepts, the tone, pace, and rhythm, and the desire to practice, and poetry, and we can start to put them together, because there is a massive history and a massive amount of poems out there. And so what I started to do was I would pick up one of my books and I would just start flipping through, and I would find a poem that spoke to me in a specific and unique way. And I would find a poem that had a really interesting and unique rhythm, a really interesting and unique tone, and a really interesting and unique pace. And what I would then do was I would hop online either at Filmsupply or I would go to Internet Archive. I would just start looking for footage that kind of fit that tone, and then I would use the poem as a blueprint to cut this archival media in that way. Find a poem, pull it apart, look at the tone, look at the pace, look at the punctuation, and find archival media or stock media and start putting it together to build a mood piece, to start to build a visual representation of that poem. What does a comma cut feel like? What does a semicolon cut feel like? What's a line break feel like? What does a word over here versus a word over here feel like? Are you going to cut a period? What does a period cut feel like? You can start to develop a dictionary of terms to use in your own edits. I want this to feel like a period. I want this to feel like a break. I want this to feel like a comma. You start to incorporate these very visceral aspects of tone, pace, and rhythm. That's what I want to encourage you guys to do, is to go out, find a poem, download some media and just start cutting. And a couple things, you may be motivated to find like a really deep, sultry, gravelly voice to read over as you're cutting. That's not what this is. Sometimes that can be meaningful and sometimes that can be powerful. What if we take away the spoken word? What if we take away anything that kind of hints at exactly what the poem is, and you literally just cut for tone, pace, and rhythm to practice those things? I'm just going to show you 3 poems from 3 different poets, and you can start to break into and see what I'm talking about with this tone, pace, and rhythm approach to these poets. So the first one is Seamus Heaney, and he has a poem called The Badgers. And I'm not gonna read it, but what I want you to do is just kind of take it in and look at the words and how they can start to be visually represented in tone, pace, and rhythm. All right, now let's take a look at this E.E. Cummings classic, but he had like a really psycho time in his poet life. That is the most absurd thing I've ever felt and seen. And so what does this poem look like as an edit? Now, Jenny Z, she's a contemporary poet. She writes a lot about like life and memories and growing up and just kind of going through the transitions of life. And so hers has a much more contemporary feel. So I would say, you know, what does this look like as an edit? So find some footage, find an interesting poem, put it together, and really dive into the nuances of editing and explore tone, pace, and rhythm. We did another one. I mean,